the words of our mouths and the meditations of all our hearts be now and at all times acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. The story associated with the raising of Lazarus is perhaps apart from the Passion narrative, the longest story in the New Testament scriptures. And it seems as though John goes at tremendous lengths to tell this story about Lazarus and his being raised from the dead. And as the story goes on, you get the sense that the story is about more than a man being raised from the dead, even though one is more than likely willing to focus on that, primarily because it isn't something that happens that often. Yet somehow the story seems to go way beyond the raising of a man from the dead. The story seems to be telling us a lot more. And perhaps the key for it is the antiphon for this morning's psalm. With the Lord there is mercy and plenteous redemption. With the Lord there is mercy and plenteous redemption. I think as we get closer to the Holy Week, there is a tremendous sense that the scriptures seem to be leading us to a place that reminds us of the love of God and the willingness of God to restore afresh, to restore anew, to make that which has been worn down into something new, something vibrant. And it is interesting because in this time, as we in Barbados go through all sorts of challenges, there seems to be this tremendous sense of a dying that is taking place, a shutting down, a becoming nothing. As we look across our economic conditions and we see the many layoffs that are happening and how for many people their work life is more or less coming to an end prematurely. And there's this sense of death. We look on the physical side. I was speaking with a builder of coffins yesterday. Funny conversation, but he lives in the district. And he was reminding us that he listens to the obituaries, and every morning there are about 27 or more persons dying or being buried. And somehow there seems to be this tremendous thing that is happening around us, being surrounded by death. Ever so often, another family in the faith community here is dealing with the terminal illness of some relative, some member. And so it seems that we're in a time where death and dying and end seems to be the watchword, seems to be really central to our experience. And for many, there is a tremendous sense of despair. There is a sense of, will there be a tomorrow? Why bother anymore? We seem to get this among our young people too, where they seem to have disconnected with the society as we know it. And they just seem to opt out of society. Many of our young men seem to opt out of society, thinking that it has nothing to offer. So there is this tremendous sense of dying, of death. We look around in our Anglican church and we recognize the aging of our congregations, and we are very, very aware of the fact that there are not a lot of young people anymore in our churches. That too says that our churches are dying. So there seems to be this tremendous message of the impending end. And so we begin to go through the motions. Yet this morning, if we are willing to listen, the Word of God speaks of hope. The Word of God speaks of bringing to life that which is dying, that which is dead. Even John, in his message this morning, doesn't put a lot of emphasis on Lazarus. He puts more on Jesus. Because the reality is that Lazarus will die. It's the reality. The minute you're born, you will die. We know that. So the emphasis isn't on Lazarus being raised, because Jesus isn't going to be around to keep raising Lazarus. But the emphasis is on the redemptive power of God. Lazarus is but a symbol. Just as the prophet Ezekiel, in his vision of the valley of dry bones, where God says to Ezekiel, prophesy, breathe, bring spirit into this circumstance, and see what happens. But we know by now that the word spirit and wind, those two words basically use spirit, wind, breath. They're more or less coming out of the same root. And so the sense of breathing is more about spirit. Then Paul picks it up, and Paul says for us in the epistle from Romans, that to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the spirit is life and peace. To set the mind on the spirit is life and peace. And so what Paul is saying to us here, just as John and just as in Ezekiel, that when our focus is on that which is mortal, the only thing that we can look ahead to is death. But when we set our minds on the Spirit, when the Spirit becomes our driving force, when the Spirit becomes our focus, then there's a transcending of death. Not that death doesn't happen. Not that things don't come to an end. But there's a passing through. And I think this is where we're being asked to focus this morning. To focus on the transcending or the transcendence of death. Because we can't stop death, but we can pass through death. We can pass through the death of a loved one. We can pass through the death of a relationship. We can pass through the death of a severe illness. We can pass through. But oftentimes, we are destroyed. Even though we continue to live, we are destroyed. Because we have set the mind on the flesh. We set the mind on that which is in front of us. Jesus says, I the I am, ego eimi, I the I am, resurrection. The I amness of God is forever giving new life. If the people of God, if those who call on the name of God are willing to embrace the new life, are willing to accept the death and pass through the death to the joy that awaits on the other side. God says in Ezekiel, he is to tell Israel that he is about to begin something new. He's going to make a new Israel. Israel is being prophesied to when they're in exile, when their whole life is being shattered, they're being carried off. And God is saying, I'm going to do something new. I'm going to make a new Israel. I don't think we understand and really embrace our faith tradition. I don't think we actually translate it into our everyday lives. I think so oftentimes we compartmentalize our lives so much that our religious experience is something apart from our life. But if we were to recognize that the religious experience, the religious teaching, the religious faith is not something that we do, but it is something that we are. We come to an understanding that my faith is more about who I am than what I do. So that as life unfolds, this same I am, this same divine being, this same person that is focused on the I amness of the divine that is present within me, as life unfolds, this being that I am is eternal and passes through all that is in front of me. And so, the teaching, the ministry, the experiences within the church, the worship, all these things are intended to so drive us inside, so cause us to go into the root of who we are, that we are prepared for life. Only faith can prepare us for life. And sometimes it is the last thing that we use to prepare us for life. Only faith. Not doctrines, not statements of belief, but faith. Faith, as I shared with you a few weeks ago, the full trust in the benevolence of God. The full trust in the fact that I have been sent into the world by God, for God. I am not a stranger. I am not an orphan. I am not an accident. I am not the product of two adults. I am a divine gift from God into the world. That, for me, translates what Paul says when he says to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. And that's where we need to be. To step aside from all that is occurring around. Focus on the Spirit. John gives us it this morning in this passage in so many different ways. Jesus hears Lazarus is really ill. Jesus continues what he's doing. Jesus gets the sense that Lazarus has died. Jesus says, oh, Lazarus is resting, he's asleep, he's fallen asleep. Let's go and wake him. What is Jesus doing? What is John trying to say to us? Jesus comes into the place and Martha says, Lord, if you were here, my brother would not have died. Jesus says, I am resurrection. Jesus is encountered by Mary. Jesus sees Mary weeping. And John gives us that wonderful little thing that says, Jesus wept. There's a groaning in the spirit. There's a feeling with for that moment. There is a flesh experience in that moment. And Jesus says, where have you laid it? For John, Jesus recovers and Jesus once again sets his mind on the Spirit. It's a powerful tool. And so it says to us that yes, we will experience the pain and discomfort of the mourning, whatever that mourning is. And this is all part of the journey. But we cannot be distracted from setting our minds on the Spirit. Yes, we will cry. Yes, we will hurt. Yes, we will suffer. But we must never lose our focus. So Jesus says, Lazarus, come forth. To set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. Where this morning in your journey are you being called to be so focused on Spirit that you can call forth resurrection?